In the depths of the Malaysian rainforest, a white man slowly pulled away the native girl's loincloth. After a night of intimacy, the woman became the colonizer's dictionary lover. During the 1980s, in the British colonies, an unspoken rule had been passed down in the British colonies to help newly arrived British officials quickly learn the local language. A young and beautiful girl would be selected from the natives to accompany them. Beyond taking care of their daily needs, they were also expected to fulfill other special requirements. Until the officials had fully mastered the indigenous language, these chosen girls were known as dictionary lovers. Except for marriage, their lives were almost identical to that of a wife. A young man named John, carrying all his knowledge and ambitions, traveled across the world to Sarawak, Malaysia, hoping to fulfill his late father's wish to build schools and educate the indigenous people. With arrangements made by his father's close friend, the local administrator Henry, John was settled into a thatched hut deep in the jungle. On his very first day there, he deeply felt the warm hospitality of the Iban people. The tribal chief, along with the villagers, held a grand welcome feast for him. A young and beautiful girl stepped forward, offering a plate of rice wine. Not wanting to get drunk on his first day of work, John intended to refuse, but Malacca informed him that this was a local custom. With no choice, he raised the cup and drank the wine in one go. As he turned his head, his gaze met that of the girl who had brought the rice wine. Her eyes were as soft as flowing water. Her bronze-toned beauty enchanting, she instantly captured John's heart. Under the influence of the rice wine, he gradually immersed himself in the passion and wildness of the primitive tribe. During the following dance performance, John once again saw the girl who had been haunting his thoughts. Like a celestial fairy, she danced gracefully before him. His heart pounded wildly, as if a startled deer, and in his nervousness, he gulped down a large bowl of rice wine. Before he knew it, a wave of intoxication swept over him, and he drifted into sleep amidst the girl's elegant dance. The next morning, Henry assigned him a task. It turned out that the British had restricted mining operations in the colony, but some Vietnamese miners had crossed the boundaries. Henry ordered him to bring back the heads of those Vietnamese miners. John was utterly shocked by the brutal demand, overwhelmed by the thought of killing so recklessly. Just then, the tribal chief arrived with Selima to meet them. Henry told John that Selima was to be given to him as his dictionary lover. Being new to this land, John had no idea what a dictionary lover was. Henry tried to explain it to him in a subtle manner, but because he was too indirect, John still didn't fully understand. He stood there dumbfounded, completely stunned by this bizarre custom. What shocked him even more was that Selima had previously rejected two British officials, yet this time, she had chosen John of her own will. Selima's mother had also been a dictionary lover, so not only was she fluent in her native language, but she was also highly proficient in English. Faced with such a beautiful woman being offered to him, John was undoubtedly tempted. However, this custom went against everything he had been taught since childhood. In the end, he chose to reject the tribe's goodwill. He believed that refusing was a way of showing respect to the locals, but he had unknowingly brought shame upon the entire tribe. This practice had become an unspoken rule ever since the tribe was colonized, and no one had ever dared to reject it before. After weighing his options, John had no choice but to accept Selima as his dictionary lover. However, he made it clear that their relationship would be limited to language and daily assistance only. And so, Selima moved into John's thatched hut. Their living space was separated by nothing but a thin bamboo curtain so thin that they could clearly hear each other's slightest breath. The next day, Malacca followed John's orders and brought him the heads of the Vietnamese miners. John only gave a symbolic glance before preparing to report back to Henry, completely unaware that he had been tricked by the natives. As the villagers burst into laughter, Selima immediately sensed that something was wrong. She opened the bag only to find a monkey's head inside. It turned out that Malacca had been secretly in love with Selima for a long time, but now that Selima had become John's dictionary lover, jealousy drove Malacca to humiliate John. However, as a colonizer, how could John tolerate such an insult? He ordered Malacca to bring the real heads of the Vietnamese miners by the next day or he would confiscate the tribe's domesticated pigs. Yet, this soft threat didn't intimidate the natives at all. Instead, the laughter grew even louder. Just as John was fuming, his household chef added fuel to the fire. He had brought his nephew from their hometown. Hearing this, John finally understood what they were implying and felt an overwhelming sense of disgust. He never expected that his so-called principles of honor and gentlemanly conduct would make everyone assume he was some kind of pervert. Enraged, he had a heated argument with Selima and threatened to strip her of her dictionary lover status. Feeling wronged, Selima had no choice but to leave. The next morning, however, John was surprised to find that Selima had not returned to the tribe. Instead, she had spent the entire night under the shed at his doorstep. John urged her to go back to the village. At that moment, he finally realized everything and everyone in this land was vastly different from the world he had always known. Perhaps the only way to truly fulfill his mission here was to learn to blend in. He sincerely apologized to Selima, explaining that his refusal to share a bed with her wasn't because she wasn't attractive, it was out of respect and his own faith. He hoped to restore their previous relationship. Moved by his sincerity, Selima decided to stay, but no one could have expected that the man who came to educate and civilize the natives of Sarawak, John, would instead be the one slowly transformed by them. At night, John studied the local language with Selima. Under her patient guidance, he gradually developed a basic understanding of the dialect. Through their conversations, he also learned a surprising fact: Selima's father was a British officer. Just like John, when she was 4 years old, her father returned to England and was never heard from again. The only thing he left behind was a storybook sitting on her table. However, she couldn't read the English words in the book. So, John patiently taught her how to spell and pronounce each word, guiding her hand as they traced the letters together. As the distance between them closed, their gazes became increasingly intense and hazy. Selima reached out and gently ran her fingers along John's neck, whispering its name in her native language. A subtle and electrifying tension surrounded them. Finally, unable to suppress their desires any longer, they passionately kissed. After an intimate night, Selima suddenly got up, preparing to leave. John was confused. One moment she was burning with passion, the next she was walking away without hesitation.
Why'd you always go?
For sleeping dictionary, it is proper.
Dion gao ako.
For the Iban, if a man and a woman wake up together 5 nights in a row, they are engaged. You don't want that, do you?
But her words left him speechless. The next day, Henry's daughter, Cecil, arrived at the tribe for a vacation. She was an Oxford graduate, specializing in anthropology and sociology. Her thesis focused on the survival of the Iban people, including the dictionary lover custom. Everyone believed that developing feelings for a dictionary lover was unacceptable except John. He argued that the natives deserved respect and love just like anyone else, but Henry immediately shut him down. That is absolutely forbidden, Henry warned. He explained that falling in love with a dictionary lover would threaten British control over the region. Their argument grew heated, ending in a bitter fallout. Frustrated and seeking comfort, John rushed to find Selima. Perhaps she was the only place where he could find peace of mind. With Selima's help, John continued to improve in the local language. He also began embracing his role as a leader, successfully mediating conflicts within the tribe. A land dispute erupted between two families, and John proposed a solution in the native language. A tug-of-war competition. This seemingly reckless and simplistic method was, in fact, exactly that. Yet, it was widely accepted and highly respected by the local tribes. The losing family never raised any objections again. Just as John was basking in the success of his brilliant decision, he turned around and saw Cecil preparing to take a picture of Selima. However, her commanding tone made Selima extremely uncomfortable, yet she had no choice but to obey the colonizer's wishes. She looked at John with hopeful eyes, silently pleading for him to stop Cecil. But before he could react, Henry suddenly called John over. Having noticed something unusual, a village upstream in the colony had suffered a mysterious outbreak, and the bodies of the deceased had drifted downriver. Judging by their appearance, it seemed like a plague had struck. Later reports confirmed that more people had fallen ill. Determined to uncover the truth, John decided to travel to the infected village. Before he left, Henry's wife approached him. She wanted to arrange a marriage between her daughter, Cecil, and John. She feared for John's safety and promised that if he accepted the marriage, she would help him fulfill his dream of building a school for the natives. The offer was tempting, but John felt nothing for Cecil and declined. Upon returning home, he found Selima sulking in silence. John apologized for failing to stop Cecil from taking the photo, but Selima refused to forgive him. For the first time, she truly felt the cold indifference of this British man when it came to his own people. John didn't think of himself that way, yet he had no words to argue back. A rift slowly began to form between them. The next day, John led his team upriver to investigate the village. Along the way, they saw countless indigenous people who had succumbed to the mysterious illness. John realized that the situation was far worse than he had imagined. When they finally arrived, they found that the entire village had already collapsed. Most of the villagers were bedridden, suffering from severe illness. Yet, to their surprise, the village had an abundance of food, and the sick did not show typical signs of a contagious disease. At that moment, a gunshot pierced the sky. Luckily, Malacca reacted in time, shoving John out of harm's way. To John's shock, the shooter was also a white man. This only deepened his sense that something far more complex was at play. He ordered Malacca to chase after the attacker, only to make a startling discovery. A group of Dutchmen was blasting the mountainside. John picked up some of the scattered ore. It turned out to be high-purity silver, but there was no time to worry about that. When he returned to the village, Selima had collapsed. Having fallen ill, John panicked completely. Silver mines and conspiracies no longer mattered. All he cared about was getting Selima back home for immediate treatment. He decided to let her rest for one night before heading back. The next morning, they awoke to find themselves surrounded by angry tribesmen. It turned out that the Dutchman had spread a lie, telling the natives that John's arrival had brought disaster upon them. Thankfully, Selima was fluent in their language. She managed to calm them down before things escalated. In an effort to win their trust, Selima offered them rice, but at that moment, a terrible realization struck John. The natives did not grow rice. Suddenly, everything clicked. The rice came from the Dutch. They had poisoned the rice, using it to wipe out the villages near the silver mine, so they could claim it all for themselves. Meanwhile, the Dutch miners, unaware of the looming danger, were casually smoking cigarettes, thinking themselves untouchable. Suddenly, a poisoned arrow struck one of them. No matter how many guns they had, it was useless against an unseen enemy. Within moments, the tribesmen slaughtered every last one of them. After facing life and death together, John's feelings for Selima became even deeper and more unshakable, but her identity would never allow them to be together forever. Selima asked, "Where do you plan to run away with me?" But John had never even considered escaping. Naively, he believed he could change everything. He promised Selima that he would convince Henry to allow their marriage. However, when he returned to Sarawak, he quickly realized how foolish his hopes were. The British government strictly forbade marriage between colonizers and native women, and John was not the first to have such an idea. Years ago, Henry himself had fallen in love with a native girl, but because he insisted on being with her, it ended in tragedy. Not only did the girl die with hatred in her heart, but even their daughter was forever denied recognition. Henry warned John not to repeat his mistakes. He warns John not to follow in his footsteps and even blackmails John with a murder charge. Meanwhile, Selima was also facing her own desperate struggle. The tribal chief forced her to choose a husband from within the tribe, or else she would be put to death. By the time John found her, Selima had already been locked inside a cage. John used all his strength to pry open the bars, but the iron gate wouldn't budge. He ordered the tribesmen to help him, but no one obeyed. At that moment, Henry arrived with his men. Not wanting John to be branded a murderer, Selima made the painful choice to surrender, and so, the two lovers were forced apart. 1 year later, John returned to London and married Cecil, but it was only to fulfill his dream of building the school. His heart had never forgotten Selima. Shortly after the wedding, John and Cecil set sail for Sarawak once more. The land was just as poor and sweltering as before. During the welcome banquet, John kept glancing around, searching for Selima's face, but she was nowhere to be found. Cecil noticed John's behavior. She knew exactly who he was looking for. That night, she tried to be intimate with him, but lost control and bit him hard on the shoulder. She had learned about Selima's story from her mother. Yet, rather than feeling resentment, she accepted it because Selima had already married Malacca and even had a child with him. Cecil simply wanted to move forward and build a happy life with John, but she never expected that things wouldn't go as planned. One day, while washing his hands by the river, John spotted Selima on the opposite bank, but what shocked him to the core, the baby in her arms was white. John froze in place. Only now did he understand the child Cecil spoke of was his own. Years of longing and regret, now entwined with the existence of his son, overwhelmed John. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to see Selima and their child immediately. Seizing a moment when Malacca wasn't home, John secretly found Selima. Their father-son reunion was heartwarming yet bittersweet, but their love had been forced into the shadows. Whenever John missed his child, he could only sneak away to see them. However, no secret remains hidden forever. Malacca soon discovered John's secret meetings with Selima and the child. Under the cover of night, Malacca quietly slipped into John's bedroom, gripping a knife tightly in his hand. He was ready to end John's life, but just in time, Selima arrived. In the chaos, Malacca only managed to slash John's shoulder, leaving him wounded. Though a tragedy was avoided, Malacca's attempted murder of a colonizer was an unforgivable crime. Henry ordered John to personally preside over Malacca's trial, making it clear the only acceptable sentence was death by hanging. At the trial the next day, John tried everything he could to justify Malacca's actions, hoping to spare his life, but Malacca, consumed by guilt and despair, refused to fight back. Left with no choice, John reluctantly sentenced Malacca to execution, yet deep down, he couldn't accept this outcome. The night before the execution, Selima snuck into Henry's room and stole the prison keys, but when she arrived at the cell, she was shocked John had already unlocked the door. He even handed Malacca his own weapon, giving him a chance to escape. As they watched Malacca disappear into the night, they both knew there was no turning back now. They made a promise to meet the next night and run away together. The next morning, Henry discovered Malacca's escape. He knew it was John who had freed him, but John was his son-in-law, so after an angry outburst, he let the matter slide. Selima, however, was not so lucky. Henry's men captured her, forcing her to become his personal dictionary lover. As the man prepared to assault her, the kind-hearted chef risked his life to save her. With his help, Selima managed to escape, but all the chaos caused her to miss the agreed meeting time with John. When she finally arrived, John was nowhere to be found. It turned out that, just before leaving, John had been caught by his wife, Cecil, while writing a farewell letter. Yet instead of anger or shock, Cecil was strangely calm. She had long realized that John's love for Selima was something he could never let go of. Perhaps, the best choice was to finally set him free. In one final embrace, Cecil let go of the husband who had never truly belonged to her, allowing him to chase after his real happiness. At that moment, her selflessness was heartbreaking. With no hesitation, John rushed toward the dock, but fate was cruel. The ship had already left the port. As John stood there frustrated and helpless, the chef suddenly appeared. He told John that Selima had not boarded the ship. Instead, she had taken their child and escaped upstream, toward the silver mine village. At the same time, Selima was about to cross the river on a bamboo raft when she was spotted by Henry, who had been pursuing her. But to her surprise, Henry did not arrest her. Instead, he handed her his personal pistol. At that moment, father and daughter finally acknowledged each other. Yet, fate did not allow them to reunite for long, and they had to part ways once again. After bidding his daughter farewell, Henry decided to call off the manhunt, but his wife secretly ordered her men to continue the chase. John followed Selima's trail, trekking through the vast and unforgiving jungle. Finally, at the mountaintop, he saw her. They ran into each other's arms, embracing tightly, relieved to have survived. It seemed that they had finally escaped their fate and could start a peaceful life together, but a gunshot shattered their joy. Henry's men had found them. The leader of the pursuers tied John to a pillar, then prepared to violate Selima right in front of him. John struggled desperately, his fury giving him unimaginable strength. He managed to break free from his restraints and charged at the man with all his might. But with his hands still bound, he was thrown to the ground once again. Just as the man was about to kill John, a gunshot rang out. Selima had used the pistol Henry gave her, but just as she prepared to fire again, the gun jammed. With death approaching, a poisoned arrow suddenly struck the man's throat. It was the tribe John once helped. They had arrived just in time to save them both. In the end, John and Selima chose to stay in the jungle instead of returning to England. The place where they had met would now become their home for the rest of their lives. The man who once wanted to civilize the natives had been transformed by them instead. Perhaps love works the same way. It's not about changing the other person, but about discovering harmony within each other's differences. Maybe that's the true essence of love. I'm Movie Lover. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.